love. Arrow Video has now released one of my favorite films of the 60s in a special 2-disc edition Blu-ray or 4K HDR version, 4K UHD HDR. They're separate versions, so if you don't have 4K, you can just buy the Blu-ray, and if you do have 4K, you can buy the 4K of 1968's Roger Vadim, Jane Fonda classic Barbarella, Psychedella. This is a film I first saw on TV as a youth, and then I think I've owned it in every format. I don't think I owned the videotape, but I owned the Laserdisc, and I owned the DVD, and I owned the previous Paramount Blu-ray, which we'll talk about later, and now I own this beautiful, gorgeous Arrow Video edition, which is the one that puts all the rest to shame. If you like your extras, and you like your goodies, and you like this film looking as good as, if not better than the day it hit screens back in '68, the Arrow, to spoil this, the Arrow Video version is the way to go. So we'll talk a tiny bit about the movie, but I'm going to dive into the extras, of which there are many, and it took me many, many hours to happily sit and watch all this. So Barbarella, 1968, produced by Dino De Laurentiis, who went on to do Flash Gordon, the 1980 Flash Gordon. And I always think of that when I think of one of these movies, I think the other because it has a similar vibe overall to it. Very good double feature that would make, by the way. And this stars Jane Fonda as the titular Barbarella character. She is later dubbed Queen of the Galaxy in a post-Star Wars re-release. But Barbarella is this space adventurer who is asked by the president of the planets, or the president of Earth or something like that, to go and find this scientist who's been captured or is in the hands of bad guys. His name is Duran Duran, from which the band took their name. He is, and he has this special device that will potentially cause havoc and be a great, terrible weapon, which is something that doesn't exist anymore in this perfect future that we're watching in this film. And Barbarella has to go and retrieve him to safety so that his mind and his weapons can't be used by evil people. So we have some fun cameos, some fun casting in this movie. You've got John Philip Law as an angel. You have a blind angel. You have David Hemmings as a revolutionary leader. You have Anita Pallenberg as the Black Queen, who refers to Barbarella as pretty, and some other familiar faces and unfamiliar faces. Mostly the faces in this. Marcel Marceau, speaking, is in this film, and it just has a great look to it. It's based on a saucy French adult comic strip that was semi-controversial in its day, not terribly according to some of the extras, but it raised an eyebrow here and there. And so it was one of the very earliest, really, comic book movies, that if you want to go trace the history of that. And it just has a fantastic visual style, all shot obviously in interiors and sound stages, and it's got this weird theatrical, retro-futuristic look to it. Great music. I love the soundtrack. I've got a couple of copies of the soundtrack. It had the CD back in the Napster days. Here we go. Back in the Napster days, I was looking for things that were just hard to find physically, and I was able to find a rip of the Barbarella soundtrack. So I had burned that to my own CD, and then I finally bought a legit CD that came out not long ago, and then I bought a picture disc, and if I would have knew where all this stuff was in this house, I would have show and tell right now. Anyway, I've loved Barbarella for a long time. So some people don't like the movie. Some think it's really surface and kind of dumb and not as good as the comic. It is what it is, and I love it. So let's dive into the extras, shall we? So I'm going to read through I took voluminous notes here, so pardon the eye line for a moment. For the audio, you have the original English mono dub. Or the English mono version. You have a French mono version in which Jane Fonda dubs herself in, to my ear, pretty perfect French. She was married to the director Roger Vadim at the time, so I would presume she could speak French pretty well. You have an English Dolby Atmos version, so a nice, super high-tech sound version, which is nothing I have in the home, so I can't really speak upon that. The 4K UHD HDR edition presents the film in 4K, ultra high definition, HDR, which I don't remember what that means, but it's a really good contrast. It's blacks, whites, and really strong color. I watched this film in 4K HDR, and it looks gorgeous. I also watched the extras via Blu-ray on a nice 4K TV, but technically not in 4K, and that's how I listened to the commentary and everything. And that looked just about equally as good. So I don't know, to me, if the 4K is a gigantic step above the Blu-ray, if you are thinking about which one to buy, one over the other. If you have a 4K set, I think you probably just want to go ahead and get the 4K for that little extra sharpness that it has there in depth, but otherwise I think they both look phenomenal. Contents of these two sets are the same. So If you buy the Blu-ray edition of this, not the 4K, you get the same stuff that you get on the 4K. The packaging, which I don't physically have, the screeners I get don't have the packaging, but I've seen here photos of it. The packaging is beautiful. It's new art, it's vintage photography, it's mini posters and lobby cards and booklets, and if you love Barbarella, you almost kind of want to get it for the extras in the packaging, which I'll get back to that comment a little bit later. So the deal here with the first disc 1 of the 2-disc set, is the film, which runs 98 minutes, the most uncut version of the film we know. The there's a commentary by Tim Lucas, who is a film historian, used to run Video Watchdog magazine. If you see a Tim Lucas commentary listed on the packaging for anything, you know it's going to be interesting and informative and no gaps, no play-by-play. Listen, so that's great from him as always. You get the isolated score. I love the score of this film, so you can play this movie with no dialogue or effects, just the music and the visuals, which is kind of an interesting way to do it. And sometimes the isolated score track affords you the ability to hear music that wasn't put out on the original LP soundtrack, at least, because those were limited to 20, 30 minutes of music. Later in the CD era, you can get a complete score or closer to that. You get alternative opening credits that run 2 minutes, and it's a slightly different animation of the titles that float around Barbarella while she is stripping in zero gravity during the credits, and you get an alternative closing credits that runs 1 minute, and it's a different style and coloring of the animation titles that are flying at you at the end. So disc 2 is just extras. Disc 2 is nothing but the dessert, nothing but the or the meal, depending on whether you're going to watch the movie or not. So here we go. I'm going to tell you what they are. I'm going to tell you what I thought of them. Another Girl, Another Planet, an appreciation by film critic Glenn Kenny that runs 23 minutes. This is really cool. It's sort of an introduction to the film, but it's 23 minutes. So it's him just talking about the film, illustrated with clips and stills. You get Barbarella Forever, a behind-the-scenes featurette featuring rarely seen footage shot by Paul Joyce in 1967. It's 15 minutes. It's phenomenal because it's all kinds of on-set footage. It looks perfect. It's not like an old cruddy transfer or an old, cruddy film stock or anything. It looks beautiful and gorgeous. It looks like some of it might have been recreated with more modern versions of the stills that might have been in the original, because when there's some stills going on and some motion and some fast cuts of photos, it looks maybe a little bit better than the film stock quality does, but I have no beef with that personally. It looks like a featurette that would have been made in 67, and it's cut and scored with that style of pacing, so it's very mod, which I love. You have Love, Tim Lucas and Steve Bissette on Barbarella. It's 113 minutes. It is a history and legacy of the comic and film, and it's two old friends, Tim Lucas, the aforementioned Tim Lucas, and Stephen R. Bissette, my close personal friend, legendary comic artist S.R. Bissette, as I jokingly say, who I know. And they're via Zoom having a conversation about this movie, and Steve gets deep into the history of the comic and other similar comics at the time to try to really put the film and the comic it came from in the context of the era, and really kind of take you back to what it was like when this film came out, and their own personal feelings about the film and the comics. So that was fascinating. I could listen to those guys talk forever, and have to a degree through these things. Dressed to Kill, Elizabeth Castaldo-Lundin discusses the costume designer Jacques Fontenay. I'm sorry about those pronunciations. Creative input into the unique look of Barbarella. 31 minutes. Once again, I find my eye drawn to the lower right-hand corner of the frame in these interviews they've done with her, because she's in front of a bookshelf, and there is, it's blurred, it's out of focus, but there is the Spies Like Us movie novelization just sitting there. And I'm always just like, so she's talking, I'm like, oh, I wonder if I could figure out, hey, it's the Spies Like Us novelization. Why did she have the Spies Like Us? Whose house has the spy, other than mine, whose house has the Spies Like Us narration? Anyway. Novelization, not narration. Her segments are always very interesting. They utilizes a lot of original sketches, the charcoal sketches, for the ideas for the costumes for this film. So you can see the concepts behind the costumes and how they compare to what finally came out. Very interesting aspect of the film that they've had Castaldo-Lundin on a few of these Arrow Blu-rays, and it's an interesting thing that I don't always think about, but is part of the look of the film. When you think about Barbarella, you think about the costumes of Barbarella, and it's nice to get a deep dive into the person behind that, and what they were shooting for, and what materials they used, and all kinds of stuff like that. Framing for Claude, Cam Op Roberto Girometti, sorry Roberto, talks about his career and work on Barbarella under cinematographer Claude Renoir, that is 17 minutes. That's very interesting, and it's his experiences of working on the set. And he keeps talking about how he was just dumbstruck or awestruck by how gorgeous Jane Fonda was, and people would be like, stop staring. You know, she's married to the director, right? Stop staring. And it's just, and there's some fun stories of just being on the set and how that whole thing went. An Angel's body double. Fabio Testi discusses his early career as a stuntman and body double for John Philip Law on Barbarella. I had no idea. I guess if you freeze the frame, maybe you can see him as like an extra in the film too. That's 24 minutes. Fabio Testi, who was the star of numerous spaghetti westerns and Italian police films and action films and dramas. He had a pretty huge body of work, and it's so funny to see him. I didn't expect this, and wow, he was a stunt double for John Philip Law in this film. So a lot of it is more him talking about his early career, as it says. It's him talking about how he got into films and how he developed as an actor from like a stuntman to an actor in some of his early roles, and then talking about Barbarella a bit. And it's just, he's just this cool, likable, super suave guy interviewed somewhere, you know, with a lot of flowers behind him outside in Italy. And I could listen to him talk forever too about his career. And it was just bizarre to see this guy who to me is a big star talking about a film that nobody associates with him, that he had a role that you wouldn't even know he was involved with. Then you have Dino and Barbarella, not the Flintstones dog. Dino and Barbarella video essay by Eugenio Ercolani discussing the role of pioneering Italian film producer Dino De Laurentiis in the creation of Barbarella. That is 14 minutes. That's very interesting. Dino De Laurentiis is a name that I always saw growing up. You associated him with the 76 Kong, with Barbarella, with Flash Gordon, with innumerable things, up into working, producing Evil Dead 2 and Army of Darkness even. So it talks about his history and his history with Barbarella, which is cool. You get promotional material. You get the 3-minute original trailer, which is very cool, funny, and very much of its time, a work of art in and of itself. You get the US TV spot, which is 60 seconds, which doesn't look as good. Everything else looks perfect on this. This looks a little smeary, a little muddy, like it was either a very old video transfer or an old video transfer transferred to tape that has just, the only version they could find was this video copy, but still it's very cool. You get 3 minutes of US TV, US radio spots, which are wonderful. And then you get an image gallery, which is 85 images as a step through thing, which is very cool as well. I love Barbarella. I love this release. To me, this is the one to get. But there also was a few years ago, I just rediscovered, I have it, the Paramount had a Blu-ray edition of this, and it was in a really nice, it had the Barbarella Queen of the Galaxy cover, which is the same that they used for their Laserdisc that I used to have. So it's kind of brown tones. Apparently this artwork and that Queen of the Galaxy thing, as I said before, I learned in the Tim Lucas, Steve Bissette discussion. Barbarella was re-released after Star Wars came out. Everybody was science fiction crazy, and it was, that new artwork was done, and the Queen of the Galaxy was put on there. That was the cover that they used, and the title I think they used for the cover of the Paramount release. I popped that in to see how much better does this Arrow version look, and moreover, do I need to keep this because are there any extras that are on the Paramount version that are not on the Arrow version? Usually Arrow is really good about porting over older extras, but once in a while something straggles, and if it's a movie you love or an extra you love, you're like, I have to have 2 copies on the shelf. So I looked through it, and there are no extras on the Paramount version that are not on the Arrow version. It does have a Spanish language track that the Arrow version does not, and the cover is really nice. It's got a slip case that opens up, and it shows like 2 different versions of the artwork, so it is kind of nice. So I think I am actually going to keep it for the cover, which seems weird. The transfer, though, to my eye, I didn't do an A/B switch. I didn't have 2 monitors side by side. The transfer on the Paramount disc from within the last decade or so really is not that different from the Arrow transfer. Now, it's not 4K, so if you want 4K, obviously you need to get the Arrow version. But if you're somebody who's like, I don't know if I need this or not, if I just want the movie, I don't care about the extras, I don't care about the packaging, then you're probably fine with I would rarely say this about an Arrow release, you're probably fine with that previous Paramount version, because to my eye, it looks pretty much the same. Sometimes you'll see a newer release, a newer transfer from the negative, a newer scan, whatever, and it kind of, I say it like, it peels back layers of gauze almost off a film, where it makes a film look way better, or the color is way better, or the contrast is way better. A lot of older video transfers, somebody with a hair color like mine would look like black hair. And then you get a newer transfer and you're like, wow, they actually had light brown hair. Like a lot of the gradient of color, gradient of contrast is sort of revealed in newer transfers. The previous Paramount transfer, to my eye, looks just like the new Arrow video transfer. So take that as you may. I would recommend getting this because if you're buying a retail copy of this, unlike what I have, you're going to get the packaging, which is gorgeous if you love the movie, and the extras in there, which are gorgeous. And that extras disc is worth the price of admission alone. The extras disc in both sets, I will say, is a regular Blu-ray. So the 4K version, if you get that, the movie is in 4K. The Tim Lucas commentary, you can only experience that with the 4K, but that second bonus disc is a Blu-ray. So either way, the Blu-ray player is going to work for that. So out now from Arrow Home Video, Jane Fonda is Barbarella.